As its 19th birthday approaches, Melee hasn't had the easiest journey, with a slew of speed bumps to becoming the community it is now. Whether it's Nintendo kinda hating us, having the biggest tournaments ever taken away, or Nintendo still kinda hating us, it truly was an underdog cliche story of Melee becoming an esport, or at least a real competitive community. This video is to celebrate the best of times, the times that boosted Melee to the positions it's in now, and the times where we as a community overcame the qualms of how we should just play the new one. Context and stalling aside, here's Allston Melee's 10 best things to ever happen to the SSBM community. Number 10, the Melee games. New England biases aside, if you're newer to the scene, the Melee games might not be the moment that came to mind for this list, but the small idea turned worldwide competition was a significant moment for the start of many players. If you're unaware, the Melee games are college-based crew battle events that ended up taking place all over the US. The idea is for your college to send your best 5 to specific events where they'll play against other colleges' best 5, all eventually tying into a big ol' region-based bracket. Friend of the Allston Melee podcast, Matt.Zeb, for as much shit as we have given him on this channel, gets major props for creating this initiative solely for the amount of college kids who picked up a GameCube controller for the first time. It's hard to really estimate just how many players actually started because of TMG, but just taking a look at the amount of college events and the player base who's still around that competed in its initial events, and the benefits still linger. Lasting for 4 seasons and tons of memorable clips, the Melee games would eventually be bought by CSL and change branding, and honestly, it's kind of unfair to the TMG of the past to be compared to its current state, but at least CSL kind of tried. The reason why newer players might not be as familiar with TMG might be at least partially to blame for the passing of branding, but many scenes and regions, our home of New England Melee included, probably wouldn't be the community it is now without the kickstart of college kids flooding to events. Number 9, Apex 2015. People who regularly attend events have favorites for different reasons. Maybe like the 10 out of 10 food you can find all around their Genesis venue, or the fact that Big House has so many friendly setups, or the beautiful Waz Worcester architecture there is around the Shine venue, but each major provides a little something of its own. At the time, for tournaments of its size, Apex really did set the standard of what major experiences could look like, with drones of players all over the world flying in. Apex's success was somewhat to blame for the East Coast and their lack of events at the time, as it really was the only place to play the full top talent. Apex 2015, throughout all of the hype and narrative being built, would be almost a complete and utter disaster if not for Twitch stepping in and saving the whole show. Somehow, throughout the anxiety attacks and the years taken off of the TO's lifetime, Apex 2015 would end up being one of the most important events, just alone with the tournament VODs going on to be the first exposure to the scene for many people. We credit Apex, whether we like to or not, to being one of the first tournaments to push grassroots Melee into the esports world, and start to make Melee majors the spectacle they are today. Giant crowds screaming, small stage with big display screen, things like the Salty Suite. Events like Pat House proved you can host a tournament anywhere, but Apex proved you can host a tournament in fucking New Jersey and get almost 2,000 people to show up. Number 8, Mango winning EVO 2013, in the top 8 in general. When Melee was at its infancy competitively, it was pretty unheard of to even consider the game getting a shot at the EVO stage. Again. 2007, the side stage at the biggest fighting game event came and went, and when the Melee bracket was rather uneventful, so was Melee's shot at a run back the next year. The way Melee eventually re-entered into the EVO game list 6 years later just might be an entry in itself, but still, in 2013, it's not like we were welcomed back with open arms. Whether we wanted to or not, we were the weird kid at the lunch table, getting called a party game and not a community to be taken seriously. People from other games not on the EVO list had plenty of resentment towards us, and at the time, FGC social media was filled with toxicity and words towards the Melee scene that I cannot repeat on this video. Although the entry name spoils the fate, Mango wouldn't be walking into an easy gold medal, as just a couple months before he took a 4th place finish at Apex 2013. Now at EVO's return, dropping before top 8 to a Wobbles who would go on to Grands, another buster moment was possible for the kid. But the reason Losers Mango was such a common saying would stay true, and Mango would go on a classic run through some of the best players of the time, although short. Alright, hear me out. If M2K were to rip off his shirt to a screaming crowd after FD chain grabbing, I'm pretty confident he would be on this entry. But Mango helped solidify Melee's spot at EVO. More people than ever were interested from the way Mango had won with the spotlight on him, the haters had temporarily held their breath, and the people on the outside finally understood what a Melee tournament looked like. EVO would invite the Melee scene back every year up until 2019, and in those years, EVO would be responsible for the two biggest Melee events entrant-wise to ever happen in 2015 and 16, and spots in the top 10 for the other EVOs. Sometimes we honestly wonder if we live in the same timeline if Wobbles wins that grand finals, but regardless, the top 8 broadcasts and the energy from the crowd was no doubt some of the reason we were invited back later, and were able to showcase the game we love on the biggest stage possible. Number 7, MLG. Before Twitch streams, YouTube VODs, and tolerable language, there was none other than gamers' favorite MLG. Hosting their first Melee tournament before practically anyone except maybe a GameStop store on release date, in 2004, MLG went basically all in on Melee. Hosting 7 different events in the cities across the US, this initial wave would be where players like Ken, Azin, and PC Chris would mark their names in Melee's legacy. MLG believed in a competitive Melee scene before almost everyone who's been a part of it. Dishing out 2 grand checks to the winners of 50 entrant tournaments and attempting to fund the most hip gamer culture possible, Major League Gaming really gave a stage to the community before it was a full community. Hosting MLG seasons for Melee in the following 2 years, after spotty appearances, MLG would host their last Melee tournament in 2014. The tournament, labeled Return to MLG, would feature a 15 grand prize pool, all of the players called gods in the modern era and a few from the past, and although probably not planned to be so, this would be a phenomenal last hurrah for MLG's love for Melee. MLG should forever get a spot in Melee's history for creating a high that we as a scene would chase for years, and might still be chasing a little bit. If they were to right now and come back in 2021 with a full circuit, it would be amazing for us as a community, but it will never mean more than when they did it for us in 06. For not just thinking of us as a party game and being there before almost everyone, thanks MLG. Number 6, Wombo Combo.
Did you know? The Wombo Combo is an extra cheese, pepperoni, sausage, bacon, mushroom, tomato, onion, and artichoke pizza still apparently sold at Round Table. Did you also know that the Wombo Combo initially referred to a fox comboing Shine up smash before the video blew up and popularized the term?
Did you know, gaming patty aside, the viral sensation that became Wombo Combo has been taken and adapted into other scenes countless times. Sometimes it can feel like the video itself eclipsed the Melee scene with millions of views and the mainstream meme it became. In the Melee scene itself, this video proved that HMW's efforts of streaming and commentating tournaments was absolutely worth it, and plenty of others followed suit trying to recreate the moment that would hit 17 million views. The video did 2 things. People who didn't even own a GameCube were normalized and entertained that there was a Melee scene with its own terminology. And secondly, that people already attending Melee tournaments should probably learn what a capture card is to stream their own events. While it undoubtedly set the fire for future Melee streamers and commentators, it's hard to put a number to just how many people showed up to a tournament because of Wombo Combo, but the fact that Fortnite kids in 2020 are still reposting the video kinda goes a long way. Normalizing Melee streams and almost the competitive scene in general, Wombo Combo takes a high spot on our list for highlighting the scene in a way that probably made you want to be a part of it. Number 5, Rollback. The most recent entry on this list by far, with most others happening at least 5 years ago, the new Slippy update was a gift from the heavens during trying times. Rollback accomplished the bewildering task of continuing to cast Melee in a positive and welcoming light, while the hellhole of a world 2020 has presented. Rollback is an updated version of the online play Melee fans have created for themselves, but with most delays only being 2 to 3 frames, it completely blows the previous adaptations out of the water. All praises to the power that is Jazz, oh holy creator of Thy Slippy, for his phenomenal work of a project being nicknamed by some as Melee HD. With the barrier of entry being lower than ever, we've seen countless people at the start of their Melee journey, even if it is people from the other scenes just trying to see what Rollback Connection is like. Right now I can download netplay, start playing with randoms, and within 20 minutes find someone just starting to get Melee's fundamentals, and a growing player base means so much for the longevity of a scene. Gotta be mentioned though that because of the time frame, we can only guesstimate the real impact this will have on tournament and majors, but hopefully the skyrocket of Mayflash adapters can translate a little bit. Playing Melee is easier than ever, and for a project done by such a small group, this is such a large benefit. Will this be the coolest thing ever for Melee during quarantine, or will this easily conquer the further entries in the future? We'll just have to wait for the first majors to really tell. Number 4, Revival of Melee and Genesis. Brawl killed Melee was almost something you could say with complete accuracy in 2008. Melee's competitive scene has successfully lived through the launch of 3 new Smash games, and disrespect to other communities aside, we're just kinda happy we didn't end up like Street Fighter 4. Completely unheard of now, leading up to Brawl's release, really everyone playing Melee competitively was innocently excited to play the new game. Soon after playing the game, you know the story. Tripping, yada yada, no wave dash, bad game. But at the time, there weren't many Melee tournaments to just come back to after a Pound 3 send-off. Brawl's launch was for sure the closest the Melee community has come to death, with stories of people traveling 3 hours for 10-man locals at the start of 2008. Initially just a local, 1 year later after almost no noteworthy Melee events, Alucard, an old school NYCTO, would pivot on the branding for his events after confirming Mango was coming from California. Now being called the revival of Melee, the in-your-face branding would catch the eyes of the people it needed. The tournament would end up featuring so many talented players from all across the world and a celebration and claim of Melee not being dead, with 136 entrants showing up. An M2K comeback at the event would amass a crazy amount of YouTube views and be the only thing coming close to Wombo Combo in terms of recent viralness. Just in case anyone still had any arguments, 4 months after, Genesis and NorCal would build even harder on the statement of Melee's well-being. Getting almost 300 entrants, something most tournaments before Brawl weren't even doing, the California-based events would admittedly do more than just get people in the door. Featuring Armada's debut in the US, a storyline and narrative would be built on concrete floors that is still talked about 11 years later. It does feel a bit slighted to put both these extraordinary events in the same entry, but we do so because in part they helped accomplish the same extraordinary task of bringing Melee out the f***ing mud in 2009. Number 3. The Spirit Bomb. For the 2013 Games List lineup, EVO announced a donation drive to support breast cancer research, and that the final slot will go to whichever grassroots community donates the most money. A Melee community somewhat desperate for legitimacy again would register its game, but up against some pretty massive competition. The fan-made game My Little Pony Fighting Is Magic would immediately raise itself as the strong first seed. Their community had blown up the donation drive almost overnight, and even with Melee fans attempting to gather support, it was pretty hard to convince anyone to try and overtake the hordes of bronies using their apparently phenomenal organization skills. Just when the belief for Melee was fading, new hope would be born, but it didn't feel great how it happened. EVO would receive a cease and desist from the creators of My Little Pony over the fan-made game being featured and pull the clear favorite from the running. The sudden opportunity for a community was just created from the beheading of another one. None other than fan favorite Bobby Scar Newman would lead the charge to take the open spot. Scar would use the leadership skills that would eventually land him a management role at Twitch to send everyone at the Melee community full force at the donation drive. Countless members would later reflect on how much they actually went into debt from donating, but Scar's efforts wouldn't be for nothing. After a final stretch and possibly the worst night's sleep for some, EVO would announce Melee's spot as the 8th game on the lineup. The community raised a total of $98,000 for breast cancer research, but it should not be understated that fellow competition Skullgirls was right behind, raising $78,000. The importance of community organization skills and getting people to believe in their scene stuck, and the jump from what the community was growing up to be was pushed by this moment. As mentioned previously, EVO would invite us back in years after and consistently create some of the biggest spotlight Melee could have, all while featuring commentary from the electrifying person who led the charge in 2013. Number 2, the documentary. If you're watching this video, there's a 95% chance you've seen the documentary in full, and if you haven't, it's probably your hipster cool fact you throw around when it's brought up. The documentary is credited with getting more people to go to Melee tournaments than almost anything else, because like the Wombo combos, it went extremely viral, but unlike those videos, the documentary gave you a clear path to entry. Regardless of the content being legacy stories at this point, still to this day, the doc probably does the best job of any content available, telling the tale of why we love Melee tournaments. Doc Kids is a phrase I can say, and you immediately associate an entire generation of players with it. And that generation came the days of multiple thousand entrant tournaments. Sandbox is currently working on a sequel to the documentary, weaving the story of the God era. As of this video, one of his last updates detailed that the new documentary was in the editing process and has a good chance of debuting on Netflix. The documentary was responsible for getting so many people going to Melee tournaments, and it accidentally created new future narratives and stories through the players it would bring. Throughout this list, I've mentioned how different entries help funnel people to events, but no one can really hold a candle up to the doc. And number 1, Nintendo shutting down the EVO 2013 stream. Listen, I said this was Allston Melee's top 10, not the general Reddit and Twitter and Facebook consensus top 10. The third entry on this list to feature EVO 2013 will be also Melee's number 1, as after getting into the game lineup, EVO would be granted approval to stream the event from Nintendo. After donating $95,000 to get into EVO 2013, day 1 of the Melee event would be met with a new EVO first, and it wasn't Justin Wong pressing the block button. Nintendo would send a cease and I'm so mad just reading this. EVO organizers, scrambling to just do what they're told, would make the jaw-dropping announcement along with the switch of schedule. The organizers would later say that Nintendo tried as hard as they possibly could to stop the tournament, as well as the stream, but EVO would beg and reason with them to at least continue the bracket. The first acknowledgement Nintendo ever showed to the Melee competitive scene would be attempting to block the biggest moment it's ever had, and goddamn does it still sting. The announcement of a cease and desist would be met with extreme disapproval from the Melee community, news article websites, and social media in general. Practically every single video game whatever was talking about what Nintendo had just done, despite having the littlest idea who players like Mango were at the time. A Nintendo decision tried to stunt the people who loved a Nintendo game so much they raised $100 grand for other people to see it. Would be met with uproar and backlash extending far beyond the growing scene. Not even 24 hours and at least 30 news articles later, Nintendo would walk it the back and reverse their decision. The Melee scene, now with all of the eyes it could possibly have, would amount to a top 8 I already talked about in this video. If you thought that alone was the reason we put this at number 1, it goes deeper than that. The ability to make money off of the broadcasts and streams of Melee is something that we completely take for granted. At any point, Nintendo fully has the power to snap their fingers and make all of the Melee content we have on YouTube gone, or at least completely demonetized. If you think this is something completely unrealistic, look at Nintendo's stupid firm stance on trying to kill the PM scene. Even with Melee itself, a huge chunk of the Gods and Gatekeepers tournament VODs were deleted by Red Bull, and most likely it had something to do with licensing issues. Moments like this are why the Melee community does not need any help from Nintendo, and haven't, and cannot be killed or absorbed by the release of the new Smash game. The community has fully proven that the only organization it needs is itself in order to give the game the biggest moments it's ever had. The denial of a cease and desist is our number 1 because we really believe that this was the day we as a community bought the rights to Super Smash Bros. Melee.
Hello, my name is Patty. I am 1/4 of Allston Melee, and the beautiful voice that you just heard throughout this entire broadcast, I'm sure you're not commenting about my voice level. If you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, please hit subscriber. It super helps us in our takeover of the YouTube algorithm. If you want to watch more videos like this, you can watch our other top 10s where I talk about people who switched mains. Maybe I talk about hacked money, you never know. Or you can watch this other video where I talk about all of the beta Pokemon that you've ever seen. Click on one of them. Allston Melee. I'm dancing to music that I can't hear currently. Why are you still watching?